All right, everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling some popular health and food myths and even touch on those chemtrails everyone seems to be talking about.
Always fun to separate fact from fiction, right?
Absolutely, and especially using your sources for this one, so we'll be sure to cover what you're most interested in. Let's kick things off with something that might hit close to home. Orange juice.
Oh, the breakfast staple.
Yeah. You know, this book I've got here, the one debunking all these health myths, it talks about how the author's grandmother swore by fresh squeezed OJ every morning, for the vitamins. Turns out even the author was guilty of, what's it called? Cherry picking the evidence.
Ah, cherry picking.
Yeah.
We all do it, though maybe not always consciously.
Yeah.
It's easy to gravitate towards the stuff that already confirms what we think.
Right. If it fits our narrative. And I guess with oranges, it turns out you're actually way better off eating the whole fruit instead of juicing it.
You'd be surprised how often the simplest answer is the best one. It really is healthier to eat the whole orange.
Really? Even if you make it at home and keep all the pulp in there. I always thought that was the key.
Even then. See, when you juice an orange, you're getting rid of the fiber.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that fiber is crucial. It helps regulate how your body takes in those natural sugars.
So basically, you're absorbing those sugars differently without the fiber to slow things down.
Wow. I gotta say, this is already making me rethink some of my healthy habits. What else did you find interesting in the research?
Well, while we're on the topic of health, the book also dives into homeopathy. Oh, homeopathy. Now that's one where the science can seem a bit fuzzy for people, right? Like you dilute something down to basically nothing, and somehow that makes it even more potent.
Right, that's the basic idea. And, well, that's where the science tends to disagree. There really isn't solid evidence to back up that whole more diluted, more powerful concept.
Yeah, the placebo effect is definitely a real thing, but I can see how relying solely on homeopathy for serious health conditions could be risky.
Exactly. Just because something's natural doesn't mean it's always safe or effective in every situation.
Which leads perfectly into another topic loaded with strong beliefs and, unfortunately, misinformation.
You're thinking about vaccines?
Vaccines, yeah. Big one. You know, this research really dives into the history of them, and some of these stories are pretty wild.
Like that Balmus expedition back in the 1800s. Smallpox was running rampant. The vaccine was brand new. They needed to get it to the Americas somehow. So what did they do? They inoculated a bunch of orphans with a cowpox vaccine and shipped them across the Atlantic.
Wait, hold on. They used orphans as, what, walking vaccine carriers? That's both kind of brilliant and a little disturbing. Talk about dedication, though.
It really puts into perspective how far we've come in terms of vaccine technology, though.
Yeah.
Now we understand so much more about how they work, like the whole idea of herd immunity.
Herd immunity, that's a good one to explain quickly for anyone who might not be familiar.
Sure. Basically, when enough people in a population get vaccinated, it creates this kind of shield that protects those who can't be vaccinated for various reasons. Infants, people with compromised immune systems, that sort of thing.
Makes sense. It's like a community effort to keep everyone safe. So we know vaccines work, we know they're incredibly effective, yet the misinformation persists. Why do you think that is?
It's tough to say, for sure. Could be a distrust of institutions, misinformation spreading like wildfire online. That's why it's so important to think critically and consult credible sources, especially with something as crucial as vaccines.
This research does do a good job, by the way, of breaking down some of the common myths out there, like that whole link between vaccines and autism, completely unfounded. It's amazing how much misinformation surrounds us, even with everyday stuff. Like, have you ever gotten nervous about using plastic containers? Especially like heating up food in the microwave with them. I know I have.
Oh yeah, it's a common worry for sure. Actually, your research mentions this, talking about BPA.
Right. BPA, that's the chemical found in some plastics, and some are safer than others, right? Speaking of which, those numbers on the bottom of containers, are those actually useful? Like, what should I be looking out for?
Those numbers are super helpful. They tell you what kind of plastic it is. So like numbers 1, 2, 4, and 5 are usually considered safe to use over and over again for food. Number 7's a bit tricky. That one's kind of a mixed bag of different plastics, and some do contain BPA.
Okay, so it's not about avoiding all plastic, it's knowing which ones are better. You've given me a lot to look for in my kitchen, that's for sure. Which actually reminds me, the research also had that section about chemtrails. I gotta admit, I've gone down that rabbit hole a few times myself.
Ah, chemtrails. Conspiracy theories can be so captivating, especially when there's that visual element to them.
Totally. It's like, look, streaks in the sky, those can't just be condensation.
Your research actually mentions a YouTuber, Yellow Mellow. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, Yellow Mellow. He's great. Breaks down those theories with a good sense of humor.
He sums up the whole chemtrail thing really well. The gist is those trails are actually chemical or biological agents being deliberately sprayed on us for, well, bad reasons, obviously.
As convincing as it sounds, what's the actual science behind those trails?
It's way simpler than all that. They're contrails, made by the condensation from plane exhaust up in that cold, high-altitude air. Like, think about when you can see your breath on a cold day. Same principle, just way bigger.
Okay, that does make sense. So no top secret spraying going on then?
Not exactly. There is real research being done on weather modification, but it's nothing like the elaborate stuff people dream up in those conspiracy theories.
Speaking of which, this research talked about the inoculation theory, which sounds like, what, vaccinating yourself against bad information?
Exactly. It's this idea that by exposing yourself to a little bit of misinformation, but paired with explanations of why it's wrong, it's like you're building up resistance to falling for it in the future.
So, like, training your brain to spot those red flags early on? Makes sense. Okay, so we've tackled some big ones here. Orange juice, homeopathy, vaccines, even chemtrails. Anything else this research debunks that we should touch on?
Well, since we're already in the health realm, how about a couple more widespread beliefs? Ever heard the one about milk causing acne? Or that sunlight can cure it?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I've heard both of those. What's the real story?
Let's start with the milk one. There's some evidence that dairy might make acne worse for some people, but it's not a hard and fast rule for everyone.
So it could be a factor for some people, but not everyone reacts the same way.
Exactly. It really comes down to paying attention to your own body and what works for you. And as for sunlight curing acne, another myth, unfortunately.
Wait, see, that one always surprises me because I know people who swear their acne clears up in the sun.
It might seem that way initially, but UV radiation from the sun can make acne worse for a lot of people. It can lead to more inflammation, increased oil production, and even those dark marks that acne can leave behind. Dermatologists call it post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation.
Ugh, those dark marks. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And speaking of the sun, this research did have a whole section on sunscreen basics, which feels very appropriate right now.
Totally. We're talking SPF, UVA versus UVB rays, the difference between chemical and physical sunscreens.
Okay, help me out here. What do I really need to know about protecting my skin? There's so much info out there.
Right, so SPF, or sun protection factor, tells you how well a sunscreen blocks UVB rays. Those are the main culprits behind sunburn. But then you've got UVA rays, which are sneaky, they penetrate deeper, and are a big factor in aging and skin cancer risk.
So we need protection from both types. Now, what about the two kinds of sunscreen you mentioned? Chemical versus physical? What's the difference?
Good question. Chemical sunscreens, they absorb UV rays and then turn that into heat energy. Physical sunscreens, on the other hand, act like a shield, reflecting the UV rays away from your skin. Both types have pros and cons.
So we've gone through a whole bunch of myths, from orange juice to vaccines to chemtrails. Pretty wide range. It's definitely been eye-opening. But where do we go from here? What's the main takeaway from all this?
That is the question, isn't it? And it's bigger than just these specific myths we've talked about. It's about giving you the tools to handle the flood of information out there, the accurate and the not so accurate.
Being able to think critically about what we're seeing and hearing. Because we can't just believe everything, right?
Exactly. And it starts with, well, questioning our assumptions, even the ones that seem obvious. Remember the orange juice thing? We just accept things as true, often without really looking into them.
Like fruit must be healthy. Things aren't always that simple.
Right. And once you start questioning, then you can start looking for solid evidence. Don't just rely on, like, social media or random websites for health info.
Especially not that one article my aunt shared on. Yeah, we won't go there.
Go straight to the source.
Yeah.
Scientific organizations, those kinds of places, academic journals, government agencies like the FDA, the WHO, those are the voices you can trust.
Makes sense. What about those emotional appeals, though? It's easy to get caught up in fear, especially when it comes to health.
Oh, absolutely. Fear is a powerful motivator, and sadly, it's often used to spread misinformation. So if something sounds too good to be true or way too scary to ignore, that's when you got to take a step back. Breathe. Look for the facts,
Don't panic. Easier said than done sometimes.
For sure. One last thing I'll add. Be open to changing your mind. Science is always learning new things, so what we think is true today might be outdated tomorrow. That's okay. It's part of the process.
It's kind of exciting when you put it that way. This deep dive has been a great reminder that we all have the power to be more informed, more careful about the information out there, what we choose to believe, And why?
It's about taking charge of our own well-being, really. Understanding the world around us, making smart decisions, not just accepting whatever's thrown at us.
That's a great point to end on.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, here's something to think about. If you could ask the author of this research one question, what would it be? What really stuck with you from our conversation today? What are you going to go learn more about? The journey doesn't end here. Keep asking those questions, keep exploring, and never lose that curiosity. Until next time.